Hey, Jasmine, how you doing?
Hi, I'm good, Donna. How are you?
I'm awesome. It's been a while. In fact, it was really awesome meeting you at the NAM Jam. That was the Rovner Jody Jazz Leger Jam in January.
It was great meeting you as well. I had a great time. So,
That was a lot of fun. So, we managed. What was really cool, we were put on stage together. We got to perform together, and then we got to talk in the background. And it was so cool because there were quite a few women performing, and you normally don't see that at some of these
no,
jams at the NAM convention.
not at all, not at all. So it was a pleasant surprise. I didn't expect to see so many female saxophonists. And another thing, as you know, it's not many females in general in jazz. Going to different gigs and stuff. So I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I would agree with you there. And the cool thing, though, is that there's more and more women in the scene now, on all instruments, not just the typical vocals and piano. So it was really cool to see. It was definitely cool to see. So, yeah, we got to talking at NAM, and I was thinking to myself, we were starting this new podcast, Nick Manella and I said, you know what? I got to have Jasmine on. And but it's been really hard because you've been so busy, with all of the performances that you're doing, and the CDs that you're working on and stuff. So I wanted to talk to you about that today. But what I first want to ask you is, you were born in Germany?
I was actually. My dad was an officer in the military. So I left Germany when I was like 3. So I really was raised in Alabama, most of my time in Alabama.
Wow. So do you have any recollection of your time in Germany at all?
I have none. All I have are pictures. So I hope to go back. I hope to return. It's on my list of things I must do.
Absolutely. And actually, so wait, so do you have dual citizenship with Germany and the United States?
I do. I do.
Wow.
So yes, I have to put that in use.
Definitely. That's so cool. That's so cool. So talk to us about, we want to know about your journey. Okay. So, how you started playing saxophone, how long you've been playing, who have been the most important mentors for you, whether it was saxophone people or not, but, talk to us about your saxophone journey.
Well, it's funny. My parents, on their first date, they said they wanted to have kids and they love jazz music and they wanted to name a daughter Jazmin.
That's awesome.
Yes, so I feel like I'm kind of destined to play jazz music. And, you know, I started on piano in elementary, but when I was in middle school in 6th grade, I got this saxophone. I had an alto saxophone, and that really jump started, my love for saxophone, my love for jazz around 7th grade. I even went to like the Janie Aebersold camp.
Mm.
They had that in Louisville, Kentucky. I went there, and that really inspired me to, just, it sparked my curiosity just to know more about jazz. And also my parents, oh my goodness, they have hundreds of jazz CDs. So,
Wow, that must have been great having that kind of influence in the house, right? Because I'm sure they must have been playing those CDs all the time.
oh, they were, I mean, certain, certain artists like Kirk Whalum, it was to the point where I was like, I don't want to hear this anymore. I can't take it. And I am so thankful that they did that now.
Yeah, because I'm thinking to myself, I listened to some of your singles, and you have your own unique voice from what I'm hearing, and I definitely hear like the contemporary jazz sound, but I also hear some grit and some energy to the sound that's a little bit different, which is really cool. I'm going to jump ahead just a little bit, and then I'm going to get back to your journey. But who has inspired you in terms of your sound and your playing?
Oh, wow. I like to listen to anything that sounds good. If I could say a saxophonist in particular, though, I love Gene Ammons. I love Stanley Turrentine.
Cool.
I love any kind of where I hear character in the sound. So, like, as I said, Kirk Whalum, Gerald Albright, of course, the greats like Sonny Rollins, Dexter Gordon. I mean,
Yeah.
I think any saxophonist, those are some key ones to listen to.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. And yeah, Stanley Turrentine is one of my favorite players, and I can hear like his tone to me was a little bit on the edge. So like I don't want to emulate his tone. I love Sonny Rollins' tone, Dexter Gordon. I played some gigs with Richie Cannata from Billy Joel's band. I love his tone, but I can hear like Stanley Turrentine. For me, when I think of him, I think rhythmic. And when I heard some of your singles, I thought that too. You know, I hear like a rhythmic playing. And when we were playing together at NAMM too, as well, you know, there's that difference there. You know, it's not just all smooth flowing lines necessarily. There's that, but there's also like a rhythmic sense to it and a little bit of the grit that Stanley Turrentine had.
Oh yes, I totally agree with you, and that's some of the reasons why he's my favorite. Again, when it has that certain character where you hear the person and you know exactly who it is, I truly admire that.
Yeah, that's really cool. So now getting back to your journey, so you know you took up saxophone, alto saxophone. You started on in like sixth grade, and then you went to the Jamie Ebersol summer jazz camp and stuff like that. How was your public school music upbringing? Like, you know, were there opportunities to play in public school or not?
Not jazz music. I would do like all state and solo ensemble. You know, I would do those things, but I played mostly outside of the classroom in school. So I would play at church. That had a huge impact on my playing.
In what way?
And then I think playing at church really trains your ear. And I really didn't want to play at church, actually, but it's not like at my church, again, Alabama country, you know, I didn't have like sheet music in front of me. So I would look at the pianists, see what they're doing, listen to the choir, figure out the key. That was tough. And at first it was kind of just noodling around and trying to find my bearings, but then you find openings and it makes you selective on when to play, when not to play. So I feel like church is a great, how can I say?
I guess
just a great way to start.
That's interesting. I'm glad you expanded upon that. It reminded me. I grew up playing trumpet, and we had a folk group, and my friends had invited me down. This was in ninth grade, I remember, and there wasn't really much or any trumpet music for folk groups, so I'd be making up my own stuff. And I have to say this funny story. So we'd be playing with guitars and stuff like that, and they'd always be putting on a capo and changing the key, and I always have to transpose up like an augmented fourth or some kind of craziness. But
oh goodness,
yeah, it was always just the craziest stuff that happened. But I have to share this funny story because you'll laugh at this. So one time we were playing this mass, and the priest was giving a sermon. So the guitars were on their stands up right behind the priest, and I'm on the altar sitting down next to somebody else. And the priest was getting into it, and he got so involved in his sermon that he made a movement, and his hand went out, and he right behind him he smacked all the guitars. Luckily no damage, but I have to say the hardest thing was sitting up there and not laughing my ass off.
I bet that was hilarious.
It was. I'm sorry I'm laughing right now because it was just so funny. It reminded me of that. But I know for me, what you just said about playing in church, even though I played a different style of music, and I guess that's why I can relate to like singer-songwriters and stuff, it had a huge effect on my ears and transposition. And, I think with a school background for a lot of folks, people tend to think that when you read music, you're literate, but that's not the case. The literacy comes from when you can improvise and not have to deal with the black dots on the page.
Yes, because, I think versatility, like being a musician, that is like the key thing, because sometimes you do read music. Sometimes, you're having to catch a lick just on the spot and listen. So I think it's important to do both, but like you're saying, 9 times out of 10, sometimes it's, again, having to figure it out on the spot. I find myself having to do a lot of that.
Yeah. And it's interesting too. I'm originally from New York, and like jam sessions are a lot different there than they are on the West Coast. And I'm going to ask you what they're like, if you have experience with that in the South. But in New York, like you would tell them what tunes you wanted to play, and then you go up and you play them. And a lot of times people play the same stuff all the time.
Very true.
Yeah, I try not to do that. But then I get to the West Coast, and I'm talking more like blues or rock jams and stuff like that. You go up there, they call your name, and you have no idea what's going on.
Oh.
And half the time they don't tell you the key. So I'm wondering what your
That is so true. That is funny you say that. In the South, I would say, or I don't want to say like an East Coast, West Coast thing, but even growing up, you say which song, they ask you what song you want to do, and you go up there and play it. I was just at a jam session in LA. I don't remember which month that was, maybe like March.
Okay.
And they invited me up. I had no idea what song I was even playing. I mean, it was like, if I didn't, at least have some experience, or, trying to listen and trying to, follow in, I mean, you'd be very screwed at that point. So that is so funny you say that, because I experienced, and that same gig, I played twice, and it happened, each time, like, hey, come up. And you want to be like, oh no, I don't, I'm not familiar. And sometimes you don't have that option. So
no, you don't. Actually, where do you remember the place?
Yes, well, it was at Spaghettini, so it was actually like a how can you say? It was this celebration. It was like a party for a like for an anniversary of this big smooth jazz company. And yeah, I had, they called me up, and I didn't know. I'm trying to remember which song it was. Something like Earth, Wind, and Fire, something along those lines. Stevie Wonder, where you have to have listened to know like the licks. Stevie Wonder is one of those, any of his works, you have to, those licks can get you off.
Oh yeah. And that's if they do it in the original key, or if they do it in the guitar key,
Well, very true, very true. So a lot of focusing, I guess.
That's awesome. Oh my gosh. I wish I would have known. I would have come to see you, unless that was a private party. I'm not sure, but now you get a taste of what I'm talking about.
Oh, I know exactly what you mean. And I'll definitely keep you updated if anything else is happening.
Cool. That's awesome. Yeah. So, so getting back to like, playing in churches and stuff, I think a lot of folks that subscribe to my newsletter and take my courses, they play in church, or they want to play in church. So what kind of advice would you give to those folks?
I would definitely say listen. A lot of listening. Even if you're at home and you're listening to people on YouTube, I would whip out my instrument, saxophone, trumpet, whatever it is, guitar, and try to imitate some of those things. Not exactly what they're playing, but maybe try to figure out the key, play some lines around it. There's nowadays, there's videos on YouTube suggesting on what to play and how to play at church. So many resources.
Wow, I didn't even realize that part. And I guess it also depends on the type of church too, right? Because the churches that you played are more gospel music.
Yes, but there's so many subgenres within church music or gospel music. You have the praise and worship music, and you have so I mean, the church I play at now, it's praise and worship music, so it's a little different than how I was raised. So it's again that versatility and adjusting.
Yeah, definitely. Wow, that's so interesting. Thanks for sharing about that. So, all right, so you played in churches growing up. At first you didn't want to, but then you did, and you're realizing now, good for mom, yay mom.
Yes.
And I guess the question that I have, or maybe the comment, is that I think it was probably really good that you did do that, because in school you were doing mostly the classical thing, which is basically looking at the page and reading the music. And you had mentioned you had done the All-State thing and all that kind of stuff. So obviously you were a really good musician. But I bet you, I know from my own experience and from a lot of other folks too, when you're classically trained, it's really hard to start to improvise because you feel insecure. You don't know what to do. Even though you may technically be really good, you feel like you're a beginner again. Have you ever, did you feel that way back then?
Oh my goodness. It's funny, when I was, this, there's many different paths. If you try to play classically and the whole style of jazz is completely different, down to like how the vibrato is, it comes a little more after the note, as in classical, it's within the note, like classical vibrato, or just like even phrasing, just there's so many different mindsets you have to have. And even with smooth jazz and jazz standards, before I got into jazz standards and your Stanley Turrentine and Gene Ammons, my parents listened to a lot of contemporary jazz. So they listened to a lot of maybe like Chris Bodie, like I said, Gerald Albright, Kirk Whalum, Boney James, all of these people. So I was trying to have that style, and I went to the Jamie Aebersold camp, and they're like, whoa, and I learned very quickly, you have to switch that. It's different hats you're having to wear. So when I got in college and I did classical and jazz, I felt like sometimes like a chicken with its head cut off, because it was like, oh, just kind of all over the place, just wearing different hats.
Yeah, talk to us a little bit about, your, I guess, the experience with the Jamie Aebersold camp, in the sense that you had a lot of listening background with contemporary jazz, but then you go into the Jamie Aebersold camp. Like, what was that like for you? What were some of the big takeaways that you got?
I was just getting into jazz at that point, and I was just getting into jazz standards. I went there, and the only jazz I knew, again, was a lot of contemporary artists. I truly believe jazz standards is the foundation. Like, you really need to, if you've just been listening to just contemporary and not these other genres like bebop, or, you're doing yourself a disservice. So this is middle school, 7th grade. I go to Jamie Aebersold camp, and someone heard me play, and he was a student at the University of Kentucky. And he gave me all these CDs.
Oh, wow.
Of Stanley Turrentine, and I have them to this day. Stanley Turrentine and Gene, all these artists, Dexter Gordon, Sonny Rollins, and he was telling me to just listen to that. So I didn't have a huge foundation in jazz, so it wasn't too difficult for me to reset that foundation and then just build from there.
Got it.
But yeah, I think it's a little rough when you start with, just contemporary and not knowing, the true origins of jazz, should I say.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. It's sort of like you're starting on the 3rd floor of a house that has no foundation.
Yes, because it came from somewhere. All of the things that you hear contemporary artists play, they have listened to the origins and how, jazz started. So, and, they worked from there. So.
Yeah. And the interesting thing too, I think what a lot of people don't realize is that the contemporary jazz artists, and, you can call them smooth jazz, whatever you'd like, they feel that they don't have, there's a whole, I think, rift in the community too, where a lot of folks that play standards, play straight ahead jazz, kind of look down upon contemporary jazz artists, and they think that they don't have the same like understanding or technique or knowledge. Have you it sounds like you've run across some of that.
Yes. And I think everyone has, and everyone has their own taste. Like, everyone's not going to like, key lime pie. And I think it's, you know what I mean? Like, I actually don't, but
I don't either.
I think if there's just an appreciation for all of those, because I think a misconception is that, like, it's something's more easy than the other, or you don't even know what someone has listened to get to where they are with contemporary. So it's not necessarily easier. It's just a different style. It doesn't mean somebody doesn't have, as we spoke, that foundation, like they've never heard Dizzy Gillespie or,
Yeah. Wow. You know, that's so great that you're saying this too, because what I think a lot of folks don't realize as well is that, you know, it sounds like it's easier to improvise in contemporary jazz, but you know, I've been in a couple of bands working on charts, working on some Jeff Lorber stuff.
Oh,
Man,
wow.
that stuff is not easy.
Yeah, no, that's, and there's so many sub genres to jazz as well. Jeff Lorber, as far as like fusion, and I mean, that's a whole nother level as well. So I would consider, everyone just kind of has their own niche and taste, and also what you like. Like there's certain things I like to listen to. I know if I went in front of a group or even a festival and I solely played, let's say, Train, or it's an acquired taste. So I don't think everyone would be able to digest that, should I say. As musicians, we appreciate things sometimes more than, let's say, your average listener, might appreciate that. So it's just different tastes.
Yeah, you know, that first of all, that's a great point. And I guess the thing too is that, you know, when you're performing, I'm tending to think also that, you know, you're thinking about your audience. You know, each audience is going to be different. So if I'm performing, you know, in a place where I know people are more hip to jazz, to maybe straight ahead jazz, then you're going to solo a different way, as opposed to if you're playing like a family festival where it may be, you know, a family or a child or a person's first exposure to jazz. I tend to think you're going to solo a different way. That's the way I'm thinking. Or do you think the same way, or you think differently?
If you mean as far as like playing different depending on the type of audience or who you're playing for?
Yeah.
Um, I definitely wouldn't go to, to play for young students and then, play some ridiculous, I don't want to say ridiculous, but something that would go way over their head to where, it might turn them away from jazz rather than attract them. I play something like Salt Peanuts, or for my students, I love to show them Ella Fitzgerald or even Bobby McFerrin, something where it's like, wow, that's cool. It's like beatboxing, but, a little different, they, just something I think jazz has a lot of things that can attract listeners, but there are also things that, again, it doesn't attract everyone's taste.
Yeah. That's a great analogy. And actually, let me get back to your journey, okay? Because what I find also fascinating too is that you had the wherewithal to realize that, you know, in school you had performing opportunities, but it was more classical in nature. But you found opportunities locally to play, which I think probably helped you a lot. Um,
Oh, it definitely did. Playing in front of people, I think that's a whole nother aspect of, because if you are practicing at home and you're just playing at home, or you're just playing with the band, that's one thing. But it's different to play in front of people, especially solo. So, and of course that takes time to get used to doing that. And that's something that I'm, definitely working on myself now.
yeah, I think
So
the
I was
church.
thankful for those opportunities.
Yeah, I think the church experience certainly helped with that. Were there other local opportunities that you played in aside from church?
Oh, many. I would play for birthday parties. I've played for weddings, like just, where I would just set up my little sound system and play my saxophone with with the tracks. I would just have tracks. And I had done that so many times. I've played at so many weddings to where, I feel like my own wedding would be very chill. If I ever got married or anything, but I did a lot of that, and I think that really prepared me for what I do now as well.
Yeah, wow. My gosh. No, that's fantastic. That's awesome. So so then you went to college and you know, you went to music school and stuff like that. Talk to us a little bit about that experience.
That was completely different. So I went in, I had a jazz scholarship, and I also was studying music or education. I love teaching, but I also love playing. So I always went with that mindset. I still do that now. But in college, as far as playing wise and performing, I really didn't do much of that. I, your professors a lot of times are like telling you all of these different artists to listen to and these suggestions with soloing and how to play. So sometimes you can get lost in that. And I got lost in that to where my own identity in my own individual playing, just what does Jazmin like? I feel like I lost that a little bit at that time.
Wow. That's actually great that you were actually aware of that at that point. I know, like with younger folks, younger meaning go all the way up to, through undergrad, you're thrown everything under the sun. You're trying to soak up everything like a sponge. And then you're faced with the task of what do you do with all that?
Yes. And I mean, it was to the point where, I played a solo and then another saxophonist got up and our solos were very similar. We're all just like studying, these same jazz artists. So one day after, college, I kind of thought to myself, like, what do I like? What do I want to sound like? What attracts me?
That's awesome. And I think, the thing is, if the audience knows that you like what you're doing, it shows. It shows in your facial expression, in your body expression, and it shows in how you approach the music. And, I guess I would ask you, like, what do you prefer? What genre do you prefer to play, if any?
Oh, goodness. I can't say that I prefer to play this genre. I like playing and listening to everything. If I could say what hits home, like if it's a good hymn or, a church song, I always like to have at least one on each one of my CDs.
Oh, okay.
So like one on mine is Walk With Me.
Cool.
And I know when I recorded that, I literally recorded it in one take,
Wow.
just because, that's home for me. I grew up playing in front of the church and playing hymns. So that was very comfortable for me. But as far as preference, of course I love funk too. I think that's awesome. Maceo Parker. Oof.
Yeah, definitely. And it's interesting because Candy Dulfer, you could definitely see the connection between her and Maceo Parker,
Oh yeah.
without a doubt. So let me ask, you mentioned CDs too. You're really young and yet you have two CDs out, you're working on your third. So talk to us a little bit about, when did you start, when did you put out your first CD? What was that experience like?
Wow, it was a good experience, a really great experience, a learning experience. My CD came out in 2000, I want to say 14.
Okay.
2015, excuse me.
Okay.
So first I came out with the EP and then I came out with the CD.
Oh, okay. And when was the EP out?
The EP was out, I believe that was 2015 as well. I played for the Smooth Jazz Cruise, and then afterwards I was really inspired to just, write and get my music out there. So
were you writing before that EP? Like were you just writing on your own or?
yes, I wrote in high school. I had like songs that I wrote in high school and these melodies that I just always had with me. So many of those are on my first CD.
Oh, cool.
Yes, but the process, it was funny. All the musicians, they learned all the songs in one day and we recorded all of the songs in one day.
Oh God.
which is like, I totally would not do that now. I would not advise it. So by learning lesson, that was definitely a learning lesson. I learned from that one. It wasn't bad. The CD wasn't bad or anything, or it didn't make the recording bad. I just, that was just a lot at one time.
Oh my gosh, to do all the songs. Oh my gosh, in one big session, it's tiring, and it's really tiring being in the studio because I don't know about your experience, but I know when I'm in the studio, I like to feed off of live energy. So it's a little tricky when you're in the studio because you don't have that. How do you deal with that?
Everyone's different. Some people do record live. So either they record live or, the saxophone separate. I like to usually record saxophone separate, but I know everyone has different preferences.
Yeah, and I know actually recently Grace Kelly, she's a great player out
She's
here.
awesome.
Oh, she's awesome. So she just did something really cool where she had a separate Facebook group. She did a what was it? A pledge music? I think it was a pledge music campaign, and like people that pledged got access to the first hour. She actually on Facebook Live did a studio recording live, live band, and the first hour was for the pledge music people. The second hour was open to everybody, and it was really cool. It was very awesome. Everything was well planned, well rehearsed. There was even choreography, all that kind of stuff. So there's many options. But I guess my question is, like, when you're in recording in the studio and it's just like sax separate or whatever, how do you what's your mindset, in terms of like, I know for me, I need that live energy, so I try to tap into that as I'm playing. I don't know if you need that. How do you approach that?
Uh, you know what? I don't have like a certain way of like before I record. I can't think of a certain mindset that I have. I know that I'm usually focused on getting all the songs out and just getting whatever I'm trying to embody in that song. That is probably my main focus if I'm thinking of something.
Cool. Let me ask you also, because you mentioned a little bit about your writing process. What is your writing process like? Like, there's some people that every morning they're, at 8 o'clock to 11 o'clock, they're writing, and they force themselves to write at that time. Other folks write whenever they're inspired. What is it like for you?
For me, it's whenever I'm inspired, and it's different inspirations. So I could be riding in my car and, sing a melody, and that's an inspiration for a new song. Or when I just, hear a song from, let's say, a Bruno Mars or Ed Sheeran or from anyone, that's another inspiration. So I just have different spurts of inspirations, throughout my life.
So then you're not just listening to jazz then.
No, no, I love to listen to anything that sounds good. I like to listen to, like Kim Burrell is somebody I love to listen to her. She is an awesome vocalist, but also a musician. She's gospel. I really like Ariana Grande, Kehlani. She's an awesome vocalist. Donny Hathaway. I listen to anything that sounds good.
Wow. Okay, what's really interesting, you're mentioning vocalists too. And just to share a story, when I was studying with Vince Penzarella in college, I played trumpet, and it was classical music, but we also had a jazz band at Queens College. In fact, Jimmy Heath started the jazz program at Queens College, so I got to study with him quite a bit. He's amazing. He's a great guy, and man, is he a monster player, and he's still playing and stuff.
Wow.
But Vince would say to me, okay, because I when I was younger, I knew about Maurice Andre. I knew about all these big name, Phil Smith, these big name classical trumpet players. And I would wait for the radio for QXR to come on with a trumpet concerto, and I tape it. And I just listen to that all the time. But it never occurred to me to listen to great singers. Although I was listening to like Sarah Vaughan or Ella Fitzgerald, but not like really diving in listening to that. But Vince would say to me, you got to listen to the great singers like UC Björling, who I never heard of, but he's a phenomenal singer. Caruso, Domingo, um, uh, some of oh gosh, Jesse Norman, some of these great classical singers. Listen to how they sing, how they phrase. And, you as a trumpet player or as a musician on any instrument, you want to emulate how the great singers sing. And you've just alluded to that, which is really interesting to me.
Oh yes, when playing the saxophone, I always want to mimic the human voice, and the singing voice. So that's something I always keep in the back of my mind.
And that's awesome. And again, just listening to some of your music, I could hear that. There's a melodic flow to it, but there's also, like I said before, that rhythmic element to it. That people can like attach themselves to, that they really like, which is really, really cool.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
So you talked a little bit about your first CD. You have a second CD out, right?
I do. My first CD was Boss. My second CD is entitled Chocolate Sunshine, uh, which definitely has a mixture of styles, you know, your church song, your funk, your Latin pop kind of songs. Uh, but I truly feel the second CD, the recording process was a little different as well.
What was that like?
Um, you know, I had about 3 or 4 sessions with the musicians. Then everyone recorded there in the studio. And this go around with my third CD, you know, everyone's just, you know, I'm really taking my time. That is my biggest thing, taking my time, you know, just taking in each part, and each part that's like how it comes together and paints a picture. So I'm
Interesting.
thinking of all of those things. Yeah.
So when with your third CD, or with your writing in general, like, are you writing it out like, okay, here's the saxophone part, here's the piano part, or are you writing out like a lead sheet and then you're saying to the rhythm section, okay, you know, I want this groove, figure it out? Like, how do you approach that for your musicians on your recordings?
Oh goodness. Each song is just different. If it's a song that I wrote, usually it's melody first and then drums. But if it's a song that, like, I have a song that I did with Jeff Lorber, and he had this kind of piano line, and then I added a saxophone hook to it. So, you know, some co-writing involved, and it's usually we're not writing it out yet. I usually write it out like when I start playing it at shows.
Oh, okay. Okay, got it. Cool. And and you said you're taking your time with this third CD. Are you going to be having people coming into the studio, or how are you going to work on that process?
I have different people on this CD, which I'm happy to like collaborate with these different artists. So a funk song I wrote, I have James Lloyd on there. It's called Funk Junk. Um, I know, very original. But another song is entitled Amends, you know, just making peace. And that's with Jeff Lorber. I have other songs that's written with this awesome writer here in Orlando. His name is Jarvis Brown,
Mm.
which is almost like a country song. I mean, Philippe Says, Kim Scott, it's many different musicians on there.
Wow. Now, how do you are they all coming into the same studio at a certain point, or how are you doing that?
No. Great thing about, you know, modern technology, people are able to send in files. So, because, you know, some of them are in California or, you know, all over. So,
So who's producing the CD?
Ron Jenkins.
Wow. Okay, so they're sending the files to him, and I guess also to you too, and you're seeing, you know, what they're coming up with, and then you're putting it together from there. That's cool. Like, that's the future. You know, that's different. It's interesting because you talked about, you know, like, you like to listen to everything. You're not just listening to jazz, and you know, you mentioned like Bruno Mars, Ed Sheeran, a bunch of other folks that are, you know, more like pop oriented. Although Bruno Mars is, you know, has got a lot of funk, you know, to his music as well. But you're influenced by a lot of the modern things that are going on, and now you're also using call it a modern technique. I mean, people have been doing this for a few years now, but you know, a different approach to studio recordings. That's the theme I'm seeing so far with this interview.
Oh yes, yes, and you know, a lot of people are doing that now, which it makes it so much easier than, you know, flying out and having to fly people out, and yeah, it makes the process a lot easier.
And probably a lot less costly, I'm thinking.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
When I went to NAMM in January, there's this thing called BandPad, and it's fairly new. And it's like an online Audacity, so but easier to use. And so I'm going to be looking into that. But I've used like Logic a gazillion years ago, and then Pro Tools. So I'm thinking though that the people probably have to send the files. They all have to be in the certain, you know, either Pro Tools or either Logic.
Yes, and you know, either of those, you know, Logic or Pro Tools, but you know, that's that's the way now. I do want to check out what you're talking about, Bandpro though, or Bandpad, excuse me.
Yeah, I'm going to send you the link, and folks, I'll put that in the show notes too. I'm making myself a note right now to do that because they actually won one of the awards at NAMM. I was talking with one of the I guess he was a sales rep, or even he was maybe been a creator, but he was showing me the software, and it looked really cool. It looked really cool. I haven't explored it since NAMM. Now you've been dropping some big names here, like Jeff Lorber and such. So how did you make the connection with Jeff Lorber? Talk to us about that.
Oh wow. Well, I saw him at a festival maybe last year, and I've seen him at like 2 festivals, and of course, you know, networking and building relationships is very important. He's very, very focused. So it's hard to get a chance to, you know, speak with him when you're about to perform, anyone when you're about to perform. Sure. But mutual friend knew Jeff Lorber, and I was just thinking it'd be so awesome to speak with Jeff and just to ask questions about the business. So it just started from there. You know, I was just asking his advice, you know, as far as writing and everything. And then it just went from there. You know, he used to tell me like some ideas, and, you know, I was wanting to share ideas that I had as well.
So yeah, let's talk a little bit about like the connections and stuff that you've made, because you mentioned the Smooth Jazz Cruise. How did you get involved with that?
Actually, that was a gift. It was a graduation gift after college. My parents got me a ticket to the Smooth Jazz Cruise.
Oh my gosh, awesome.
And yes. And I brought my saxophone on the cruise. One of my parents had been on the cruise many times. But I brought my instrument, and they had this Show Your Talent contest. And, you know, I didn't think much of like that I was going to win or anything, but I played for the contest, and I ended up winning the contest. And, you know, the judges were like Marcus Miller and Boney James and Brian Culbertson. So very nerve-wracking, but I ended up winning the contest, and that really just jump-started a lot of, you know, of things after that.
Wow. Oh my gosh. Some huge name players. That must have been an amazing experience for you. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Oh, definitely. It was an awesome experience. And I mean, I was backstage talking like David Sanborn, which is ridiculous.
Oh my God.
Yes. And it's just the magnitude. And I keep thinking to myself, you know, I don't know, David Sanborn, why would he even want to speak to me? But it was such an honor, and they were all giving just awesome advice. I can't say I've encountered many artists that haven't been helpful and, you know, sharing their experiences. But I opened for Marcus Miller. He was being nominated for the SiriusXM Hall of Fame. And yeah, so I opened for that. So I was very nervous, but I remember Brian Culbertson told me, just have fun. And if you have fun, then everyone else will have fun too. So it basically just inspired me to just take that step in writing and performing, like, you know, hey, I actually can do this.
Wow. So that was probably a big turning point for you in your life.
It really was. It really was. Ever since, like, after that, things slowly had been turning.
That's really cool, because I think in our conversation before, you were talking about how you love teaching and all that kind of stuff. And from what I understand, you're teaching right now. I think you're teaching elementary music.
I am. I teach elementary music. I'm definitely a band person. I always saw myself as like a band director, you know, middle school or high school, but I love teaching elementary music. I love getting to introduce like jazz to my students too, because you never know who's going to decide to go into a career in music or be in band. So
that's awesome. And, you know, the impact that you would have, you know, it doesn't mean that these kids are going to grow up to be jazz musicians or anything like that, but they'll become more educated consumers, and they'll have more of, as we spoke about this before, an appreciation of the music, and would be more likely to attend concerts and stuff like that. So, you know, the impact is people don't realize it, but it's actually huge.
Yes. And, you know, I think about things I remember when I was in elementary school. So I'm hoping that, you know, at the least, you know, they develop that appreciation.
it must be hard, like teaching and, being a full-time performer. I know for me, like if I'm performing all the time, I miss the teaching. But if I'm teaching all the time, I miss the performing. So, how do you deal with that?
I feel that same way. It definitely is a juggle and a balancing act, should I say. It's not easy. There are many challenging moments, but if I ever get really overwhelmed with playing and performing, sometimes I'll teach in my classroom, and that's almost like therapy for me. Like, and I think to myself, I needed that. Or if I'm teaching and school becomes a little frustrating, I might have a performance that weekend and fly out, and then it makes me more grounded. It can be stressful and hectic, but I enjoy it
That's
because I'm
awesome.
doing two things I love.
I'm going to break off on a tangent for a second. So you definitely fly all over the country and probably even all over the world. Okay, how do you handle, because you play tenor sax mostly, right? So
Yeah.
what kind of case do you have for your tenor sax and, in terms of
Oh my
flying and
goodness.
stuff?
Uh, this is this could be like a whole nother conversation, but
Yeah.
it's so frustrating. I'm very small. I'm like 5'1", and I have like back issues even now just because my case is very heavy. My instrument is heavy.
Yeah.
But traveling can be a nightmare sometimes because sometimes they'll make you check in your instrument, which rarely happens, but when it does, it's very scary. I
Mhm.
have a GL case. I am endorsed by GL cases. Uh, so that is what I have, which is a very sturdy case, but I've had many different kinds of cases. But the ideal case would have wheels. That is my dream case.
I actually have a case with wheels, but it's not the best case and it's not very sturdy, and the horn, you got to put a ton of foam in that thing to keep the horn from moving.
Is it a
Um,
leather case?
no, it's solid, but it's not solid enough. It was
Hmm.
actually when I got one of my Mark Sixes, it came in a Jean Baptiste case, and Jean Baptiste is a brand from Sam Ash, and they just had to find a case for me. But I had more problems actually with that case because the horn wasn't really snug in there.
Uh-oh.
So yeah, I wish ProTech had made a case with wheels, but then they took it off the market. So more people that ask ProTech, maybe they will make a tenor case with wheels. That would be great. But
Oh my goodness.
so your GL case, is it, you feel it's sturdy enough? If you had to check it, God forbid, the horn is secure enough?
I do think so, but in the airports, you never know because somebody could
Oh, that's
be
true.
playing football with your case and you don't even, you know. Uh, so I never really feel my horn is sturdy unless I'm like handling it, and so that's a tough one.
Yeah, can you fit that case in the overheads?
I can actually. In my old case, I could fit it in the overhead as well. It's funny though, the overhead space is pretty big, so when somebody looks at your case, they always assume it's not going to fit, and I'm always just like, trust me, it'll fit.
That's awesome. I had interviewed the two of the three Bobs from the Inside Outside Retreat, and we were talking about this for a little bit. And it was Bob Francischini that said, "Yeah, you just don't check your instrument; just you can bring it on board." And actually, there are within the law now. It does say once you're on the plane, and you've got your horn in the overhead, they technically are not supposed to move it. So, but it's always
Wow.
good to know what people are using. What cases they're using, because it is a bone of contention for a lot of folks, and it really is a huge pain point, without a doubt. So I just was really curious about that. So you know what I should do? I should get from you the link for GL cases.
Oh yes, they make them in Taiwan, I believe. But so I'll definitely send you the link.
Cool, great, I appreciate that. Now, one other question I had also, because we're both female artists and playing jazz and all different styles of music, how has it been as a female jazz artist, also a woman of color? How has your experience been so far?
It I haven't had I think there's pros and cons with anything. I would be lying if I said it doesn't help. being a female saxophonist. But there are some, challenging moments too. You know, you are sometimes oftentimes the only woman at a gig.
Yeah.
So I always try to think to myself, just to be a good example for, I think about my students, I think about young African American women, that, I represent those people and those musicians. So I always keep that in mind. If I could say an instance where it's challenging, sometimes you could try to speak to men. All men are not like this at all, but every once in a while you might run into someone and you might say something about like a correction or say something about music, and then they're not very receptive. That's the nicest way I can put it, but
yeah, no, that's true. I mean, it doesn't happen all the time. Back in the day, 20 years ago, it happened a lot more. 40 years ago, it certainly happened all the time. But I think now, like, you're coming on the scene at a really good time, and there's more and more. I'm seeing more and more female, horn players, saxophone, trumpet, not just piano and vocal, which is really great.
Oh yes, and and it does help because you can even share, experiences with these people. I know I was talking to Althea Renee, and I was talking to Cindy Bradley. Althea Renee is flautist, and then Cindy Bradley trumpet.
Yeah.
But it just kind of comes with that, in being a woman in the industry. So
yeah, I think like I said, I think you're coming up at a really good time, and and we're starting to be seen as equals and getting the respect, which
oh
is
yes.
super important. So talk to us about your third CD. I understand you have a GoFundMe project associated with that.
Yes. It takes a lot to get a CD together, and there's so many different factors that go into making a CD, and it can be very expensive as well. So, I'm thankful to have so many people that are in support of my music, and I would really appreciate, if the listeners and everyone any donation would be awesome, and could make a donation to GoFundMe. And there are different incentives. If you pay a certain amount, you get a CD, like a pre-ordered CD or T-shirt, or a signed poster. Or a mug. There's many incentives on there. So
awesome, cool, and folks, I'm going to put the link in the show notes. So definitely support Jazmin in in getting the CD out. And when do you think it's going to be out again?
October. I actually have a CD release, and they're all in California. It's 3 of them. Yay. So one will be at Spaghettini's, another at Catalina Island Jazz Tracks, and the last will be at Mediterranean Jazz Cafe.
Oh, cool. All right. Where can people, is the information for those out yet? Like, where can people, if they wanted to get tickets or just information?
Yes. All the information is on my website, which is Jazmin, Jazmin, Ghent, Ghent, music.com.
Cool. All right. This is great to know. And yeah, you're going to see me definitely at one of those.
That's awesome.
Yeah, no, that this is really great. So we've got your website name. Where else are you on the social media?
Well, I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram. I have a Facebook artist page as well. Like even if you just like Googled my name or just looked it up on Facebook, all of those platforms would show up, and it shows up on my website as well at the very bottom.
Ah, very good. And so you've got the CD release, but also the gigs, and the festivals associated around that. Any upcoming festivals happening in the next few months?
Yes. I'll be playing for Napa Valley Jazz Getaway, which is by Brian Culbertson. I'll also be playing for Derby City Jazz Festival, Long Beach Jazz Festival. As I said, Catalina Island Jazz Tracks. That's all I can think on the top of my head, but I do post on Facebook like a whole tour schedule that has in detail other festivals as well.
Okay, that's great because I know sometimes you know when you're playing a lot, there's so much you tend to forget, you know, because it's you know, it's just too much to remember. So yeah, folks, definitely check out her website, JazminGhentmusic.com, and then I'm gonna put that link as well as the GoFundMe link in the show notes as well. And also we'll get the link for the GL cases too, because I think people should be interested, and the band lab. All those links will go in the show notes. Listen, Jazmin, I want to thank you so much for taking the time. You know, when I met you in January, that was really cool, and I had a great time performing with you on a couple of the
I had a great
tunes.
time as well.
Yeah, it was great, and I know you've been so busy, and I'm just glad we got the chance now to talk because it's been a little while, but you know, I know you're so busy playing all these festivals and cruises and this and that and whatever. So thank you again for taking the time. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me, Donna. I truly appreciate it as well.